Welcome back, fellow readers. This is Suave, and today we're going to be taking a look at a light novel series that I really love and enjoy dearly. And the moment I got this new book in my hands, I had to stop what I was doing and dig right into it because I wanted to know what was going on in this story and immediately share my thoughts about it with all of you. So today, we're going to be taking a look at Goblin Slayer, Side Story 2, Dai Katana, The Singing Death, Volume 1. This is written by Kumo Kagyu, illustrated by Lack, translated by Kevin Steinbach, and published by Yen. So let's take a quick look at this book. Okay, let's take a quick look at our book here. So here we have the front cover with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 main characters in the story. These main characters make up the party, and it looks like they are standing in a dungeon. We're going to take a look at the spine real quick so you can see what it looks like when you are putting it on your shelf. And the back cover here, very simple back cover. You have the logo here, and you have a wireframe design here. We're going to talk about that in a second. The Yen logo and the ISBN number. Now we're just going to take a quick look inside. I don't want to spoil the inserts for you. We're just going to take a quick look at the table of contents. So you can see we have 3 chapters in this story, and the 3rd chapter is actually fairly long. It starts at page 77, and the book is just under 200 pages. Okay, let's move on to the review. Okay, so before we can talk about this book, there's actually 3 very crucial points that I identified about this book that I think we need to go over so that you, the reader, know what you're going into before you pick up this title. So the number 1 question that's going to be on everyone's mind when they see a title like this is, do I need to know and understand or read any prior Goblin Slayer material in order for me to understand this book? And the quick answer is no. You do not need to read the previous Goblin Slayer material in order to appreciate this book. This is a book that stands on its own. It does serve as a prologue prior to the events of the main series of Goblin Slayer, but in no way do you need to have any prior knowledge of the world or the story itself in order to be able to enjoy this title. Although if you are a fan of Goblin Slayer and you kind of understand the story, you can kind of guess where this story is already going to go. You see, early on in Goblin Slayer, we meet Sword Maiden. And Sword Maiden is a character who we know defeated a demon lord back in the day, and she's this prestigious, legendary figure in society. And so when we look at the actual cover, we see a young-looking woman who looks just like Sword Maiden. And sure enough, this is the story of her being on that adventure to slay the demon lord. So that brings us to point number 2. Number 2, Sword Maiden. So, is this story about Sword Maiden and how she conquered the Demon Lord like we learn about in the main series? The answer is yes, and a little bit of no as well. You see, in the main series, we follow Goblin Slayer, and we get to see his thought process behind everything, his interactions with everybody. But in this story, Sword Maiden is not the main character. She's not the main focus. She's just another character in the party. And it's actually a very interesting take. I kind of appreciated that a little bit. It was more of a surprise for me, but I kind of grew on to really appreciating how this story is being told, which actually leads us to number 3. So before I can talk about point number 3, first it's important that I introduce the cast of this story, and you'll see why in just a second. So we'll go through it very quickly. First we have our Myrmidon monk, followed by our half-elf scout, our human female wizard, and then we have Sword Maiden, who is actually not called Sword Maiden in this story because you gotta remember she's 10 years younger. She's about 15, 16, so she's more of a novice still at this point. But I'm not gonna spoil what her title is, I'll let you figure that out. Next we have our female warrior, and then last but not least, our male warrior, aka you. That's correct, you, the reader, are the hero of this story. You take on the role of this human male warrior, and that brings us to point number 3, the second person perspective. Now personally, I don't have an issue reading a book in the second person perspective. I actually thought it was a nice surprise, and I'm sure many of you don't have an issue with that either, but I know there's some of you who do have an issue with that and might see it as a big negative or a big turnoff, and so I wanted to make sure I bring that up front with all of you before we move on and talk about this book. So if you're still confused as to what I'm actually talking about, I'll actually have an example from a snippet down here so you can see what the book actually looks like and how it reads. And remember when we looked at the back cover and the table of contents when I mentioned it had that wireframe diagram? Well, that's actually a callback to very old school dungeon PC games. You see, you would have this like still frame, and you could see the walls from your left and right, and you would have a choice to make. You either turn to one of the sides or you go straight forward. And when you make that decision, the game speaks back to you, or you read the dialogue. It says you turn left and you encounter this creature, or you turn right and you smell this obnoxious odor and there's monsters before you. And so that's sort of the perspective that you're going to be reading from. You are this main character, this male warrior. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we can finally start our story review. So the question becomes, what is Goblin Slayer Side Story 2 Dai Katana, The Singing Death? And in a nutshell, this is a dungeon crawl experience where our 6 main characters try to best the Dungeon of the Dead. So before the world was at peace, it was plagued by an illness known as the Death. And no one really understood what the Death was, who created it, why it was there, where it came from, but they just knew that this illness was being carried by the wind and plaguing people throughout the entire world. So adventurers and military people, they kind of came together and they started following the wind currents. They followed where the death was coming from. Eventually, they find what's known now as the Dungeon of the Dead. And what these people find out is that this dungeon is actually very dark and dangerous. You go in there and they don't know how deep this dungeon goes. They just know that there are living creatures inside. And for some reason, when you kill creatures, they drop this loot, they drop money. When you clear certain chambers, they also spawn treasure chests. And over time, you would think they would clear enough and it'd be good. But this dungeon and the monsters and the loot tends to respawn over time. And so people start to really not know how much they can keep on going like this, traveling back and forth. So what happens is there is a city that gets formed around this dungeon known as the Fortress City, because people start to understand, oh, there's money involved. Let me go set up shop over there. They can sell me some of their loot, and I'll sell some of this loot at a higher price for a profit to some novice adventurers who also want to go in there. So, you have this economy, you have all these businesses setting shop, you have housing, now you have yourself an established city. This is how you get your fortress city revolving around this Dungeon of the Dead. And this, my friends, is where our story begins, or I should say, where your story begins. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still the world of Goblin Slayer. You're not some overpowered hero that's here to conquer the dungeon. When the story starts off, you enter the fortress city and you're just a novice, but you're actually already an established party leader. See, you're not by yourself, you already have 2 members with you, so there's 3 of you in total. You're trying to get a feel of the city, you want to see just how strong this dungeon is, you want to prove your worth. So you get some intel around the bars, and you learn that you actually do need at least a party of 6 is ideal. Any less and you'd be in very grave danger. Any more and it'd just be too hard to handle that many people in a tight hallway. So great, you have 3 people, now you just have to find 3 more people to make your ideal 6. And that's how we get the 6 characters in our main cover. Now, we're not reinventing the wheel of Goblin Slayer. We know what low-level creatures look like, we know how they fight, because we see how these fights go with these low-level creatures with our main character Goblin Slayer in the main series. However, in the main series, we only get a small glimpse as to how a party of porcelain-ranked novices handle themselves when they first encounter these creatures. And bad things tend to usually happen, especially in the world of Goblin Slayer. But this is interesting because we don't have a silver ranked hero like we do in the main series. This is all a group of novices and their story as to how they overcome these challenges that we've overcome them before with Goblin Slayer, but now we're seeing how novices overcome that challenge and the type of hurdles that they encounter, and it's actually a very fresh take. So yeah, there's a lot of fighting and there's a lot of action in this like you would see in any Goblin Slayer story. And it's nice because you get to see these adventurers as to how they overcome these monsters that they see for the first time, how they deal with it afterwards mentally, coming to the realization that these things do exist and this is their world. Speaking of adventurers, not everybody is here for the greater good. not everybody here is motivated to want to defeat the Demon Lord. And I'm not just talking about our party, I'm talking about everybody in this whole fortress city altogether. Some people are here just because they want to make money. When you go through the first floor of the dungeon, you still get some loot, there's some weak creatures. So some of these more experienced warriors, they don't really have the motivation to go all the way down and find the Demon Lord and defeat him. They just want to make a nice quick pay, and they'll let someone else deal with the Demon Lord, because killing a few goblins, killing a few slimes, getting a few gold every now and then is actually more profitable than it would be going back home and trying to sell cupcakes. And this brings us to our all-star cast of this series. We have 6 main characters, and they each have their own unique personalities, their own unique emotions, and so it's very interesting to see how they work together and how their relationship builds over time. So first we have Myrmidon Monk. So Myrmidon Monk is very funny because he's someone who's just going to let fate determine his destiny. He follows the captain, which is you, and he says, all right, whatever you decide, I'm cool with it. You want to go down to the dungeon, fight these creatures, and come back? I'm going to give it my all, and we're going to come back safely. You want to go grab some food and rest? I'm going to eat it all up, and we're going to have a blast. You want to get some drinks and play some cards? I'll do that too. Shopping? No problem. So he's down to do whatever it is you decide. Next you have Half-Elf Scout. Now this Half-Elf Scout, he's actually a little sly and tricky, and he's in it for the money, but he still has a good heart in himself. He'll bring himself to do some good deeds every now and then, but for the most part he wants to make a profit. Now his goal is not really to go down to the Demon Lord, but at the same time he knows the further down you go, the better the loot is, the better the money is. So he's like, okay, I might as well follow you guys all the way down to the Demon Lord. Let's go ahead and do this. Then you have Female Wizard. Now Female Wizard, she's kind of a pain in the ass. She's a thorn in your side, but she also has this fun, bubbly attitude, so eventually she kind of grows on you over time. And our 4th character is Young Sword Maiden, and yes, I'm still calling her Sword Maiden. I'm not going to spoil what her title is in this book. You're just going to have to figure it out yourself. But what you find out is that Sword Maiden is very unsure of herself. She's very shy, and a lot of people who know her around the town, they don't really trust her, and you'll see why. But what you find out over time is that both you and her find out that she's actually has her own unique strengths and weaknesses, and she plays a very key part in this group that she didn't know that she would play very early on. And next we have Female Warrior. Now I feel like Female Warrior is going to be a big fan favorite in this series. She is a warrior, she is very strong, and she is very sure of herself when it comes to combat. She is someone with a high sense of adventure, so naturally she finds a home with you and the rest of the group, and she starts building up this relationship with all of you. At first she can be a little cold, but she does have this soft side to her, and she has an amazing sense of humor, both joking with you guys and joking at herself as well. And she has a good sense of fashion too, so I have no doubt Female Warrior is going to be one of the favorites when people start reading this book. And last but not least, we have you, the male warrior, the main character or the hero of the story. You are already sort of disciplined and you have experience in leading a party. So now it's your job and your responsibility to make sure that these other 5 members of your party not only stay alive, but also keep their sanity. And it's your job to make those tough decisions, the decisions that could either keep your party alive or kill them. And a lot of your party members recognize this about you, and they know that you have to make these decisions, and they respect this about you because they don't know if they can swallow it to make these types of decisions themselves. On one hand, you might have Myrmidon Monk and Half-Elf Scout. They both know that they're gonna follow whatever direction you go, and they're gonna give it their best. Then we have Female Wizard, and Female Wizard, like I said, is a pain in the ass. She's a thorn in your side because every time you have to make a decision, she looks at you intensely and she makes sure that you're gonna make the right decision, because if you make something that she thinks is wrong, she's gonna make sure that you know about it, and she's gonna make sure that you understand what you're trying to do. And your actions with Sword Maiden is actually very unique, because we know what Sword Maiden is like in the main series in the future when she's all grown up. She's defeated the Demon Lord, as we've heard in the tales. And as I've said earlier, she's kind of unsure of herself. She's not sure why you're asking her for her feedback. But as time grows, when you ask her for her input and you start giving her responsibilities that you know she'll do right, she starts to grow on you, and then she starts to respect you as a leader. Now, Female Warrior, she's kind of slick in her own way. She knows that you know what you're doing, and she knows what decision you're about to make, but she wants to see how you actually get to that decision. And she's just glad that she's not the one who has to make these types of choices and decisions for the whole group. But at the end of the day, she understands that your decisions are for the best of the party. And that's what she enjoys and respects the most, that you care about your party. And that is the core focus of this book, is that building a relationship between you and your 5 other party members. There is still a lot of fighting and adventure, but you have to remember these are all personal rank adventurers, so they're going to be fighting the low rank monsters. You're only going to see the first few floors of this dungeon, and no one even knows how far this dungeon goes down. No one has been able to map it out. So personally, I think this book did a very good job in giving us a healthy mix of action and adventure, but also being able to let us figure out who these characters are and how they mesh together. Now you have to also understand this is a spin-off, this is a side story of the Goblin Slayer universe. And speaking of what Goblin Slayer is, there's a certain point of the story that you reach where you're like, oh, okay, there's a nice relationship building, and we're going to go to this dungeon, and we meet these other people along the way, and then you're intrigued by all these different adventurers and their stories and what they do in the dungeon. And I don't want to spoil what happens or where this happens, but there's a certain event that you read through and you get reminded very quickly that this is the world of Goblin Slayer. There is this dark grittiness, maybe even a dark humor to it, as to what happens to some of these people when they go in this dungeon. So the final verdict of this book is that it is a solid read. Whether or not you're a Goblin Slayer fan or not, you're going to enjoy this book if you pick it up. This is a book that knows what it's trying to do from beginning to end, and we already know what the end looks like based on the original Goblin Slayer series, or at least what we're told in the tales. And so this is our adventure seeing how that all plays out. And this book is just the beginning of what's to come, and I highly recommend that you guys pick this book up. That, my friends, is Goblin Slayer Side Story 2, Dai Katana, The Singing Death, Volume 1. Let me know what you think about this light novel down below, and if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button. And if you enjoyed this content, make sure you hit that subscribe, because we're going to be bringing more light novel and manga content in the near future. With that being said, I will see you all next time. Bye everyone.